The basement door should never have been locked. Marcus Williams knew every inch of the old Victorian house he'd just purchased for practically nothing at the county auction. Every creaking floorboard, every loose window latch, every corner that needed attention. But this door, tucked beneath the main staircase behind a wall of storage boxes, had a heavy padlock that didn't belong to him. The realtor had mentioned nothing about it. The previous owner had left no keys, and the muffled sounds coming from behind it made his blood run cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He pressed his ear against the wooden door, heart hammering so hard he could barely hear over it. There it was again, a soft tapping, rhythmic, deliberate. Someone was on the other side, and they were trying to communicate. Marcus stepped back, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. But before he could dial, he heard something that stopped him dead. A voice, young, female, barely a whisper through the thick wood, but unmistakably real. "Please, is someone there?" In that moment, everything changed. Not just for the girls trapped in darkness below, but for a man who had been drowning in his own despair for months. A father who had lost everything except his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, and who was about to discover that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms. The moving truck had pulled away 3 hours ago, leaving Marcus and Emma alone in the echoing emptiness of 1247 Maple Street. The house loomed around them like a cathedral of broken dreams, its high ceilings and ornate moldings a stark reminder of better times. Times when he could afford more than the bare minimum. Times when Sarah was still alive. Marcus sat on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the scattered pieces of their old life. Emma knelt beside him, carefully arranging her small collection of stuffed animals in a precise circle. She hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived, but her silence carried weight. At 6 years old, she understood more than most children her age. Loss had a way of aging people quickly, and Emma had learned that lesson far too early. The house had been a desperate purchase. Rock-bottom prices at a foreclosure auction, the kind of place that came with whispered warnings and knowing looks from the locals. The previous owner, Harold Brennan, had been a recluse who'd lived alone for decades before his death 6 months ago. The house had sat empty since then, growing more neglected with each passing season. But Marcus couldn't afford to be choosy. His construction business had collapsed after Sarah's medical bills consumed their savings, and the life insurance barely covered her funeral costs. This house, with all its problems and shadows, was their only option. Emma picked up her favorite, teddy bear, a worn brown creature named Chester that had been Sarah's childhood companion. She held him close, pressing her face into his matted fur. Marcus watched her with an ache in his chest that never seemed to fade. She was so small in this vast space, so fragile against the backdrop of their uncertain future. "Daddy," Emma said, quietly, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "Why does this house feel sad?" Marcus crawled over to sit beside her, pulling her onto his lap. She fit perfectly against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. He breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the one constant that still smelled like home. "Houses hold memories, sweetheart," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes those memories feel heavy until we make new ones." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. She pointed toward the staircase that curved elegantly toward the second floor. "There are lots of rooms up there. 12 bedrooms, Marcus confirmed. "This used to be a boarding house, way back when your great-grandparents were young. Lots of people lived here together." "Were they happy?" The question caught him off guard. Marcus looked around at the faded wallpaper and scratched hardwood floors, trying to imagine the house filled with laughter and life. "I think so. I hope so." They spent the next hour unpacking the essentials. Emma's clothes went into the smallest bedroom on the second floor, the one with windows facing the oak tree in the backyard. Marcus had chosen it because the morning light would wake her gently, and because it was close enough to his room that she could find him if nightmares came calling. The master bedroom felt too large, too empty without Sarah's presence to fill it, so he'd opted for the smaller room, adjacent to Emma's. As evening approached, Marcus heated up canned soup on the portable camping stove he'd brought along. The gas and electricity wouldn't be turned on until tomorrow, and the house felt cavernous in the gathering darkness. Emma ate quietly, her legs swinging from the chair that was still too big for her. The silence stretched between them, comfortable, but tinged with the weight of change. After dinner, Marcus carried Emma upstairs for her bath. The old clawfoot tub in the main bathroom still worked, though the water pressure was weak and the pipes groaned in protest. Emma splashed half-heartedly, while Marcus sat on the closed toilet seat, keeping watch. She'd been afraid of baths since Sarah died, afraid of being alone in the water even for a moment. Another small casualty of grief that broke his heart in new ways each day. "The water's getting cold," she announced, standing up and reaching. For the towel, Marcus held ready. He wrapped her carefully, rubbing her arms to chase away the chill. Her skin was pale and delicate, marked with the same constellation of freckles that had danced across Sarah's shoulders. Sometimes the resemblance was so strong, it took his breath away. They brushed teeth with bottled water and flashlights, making a game of the inconvenience. Emma giggled when Marcus made monster faces in the wavering light, and the sound was like music in the hollow house. He tucked her into bed with Chester and 3 other animals, forming a protective barrier around. Her small form? "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked, her green eyes wide in the darkness. "Always," Marcus promised, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma's breathing gradually deepened into the rhythm of sleep, but Marcus remained in the chair long after her eyes closed. Through the window, he could see the lights of neighboring houses twinkling like earthbound stars. Normal families living normal lives, untouched by the kind of loss that had shattered his world. He envied them and resented them in equal measure. When he was certain Emma was deeply asleep, Marcus crept downstairs to begin the real work of assessing their new home. Armed with a powerful flashlight and a notebook, he started in the kitchen, documenting everything that needed repair or replacement. The list grew quickly: leaking faucet, loose cabinet doors, electrical outlets that sparked ominously when tested, the refrigerator that hummed like a dying whale. From the kitchen, he moved to the dining room, then the front parlor with its grand fireplace and water-stained ceiling. Each room revealed new problems, new expenses he couldn't afford, but buried beneath the decay, he could see the bones of something beautiful. High ceilings with ornate crown molding, original hardwood floors that would gleam with proper care, windows that, once cleaned, would flood the rooms with natural light. It was in the back hallway near the rear entrance that Marcus discovered the storage area beneath the main staircase. Someone had stacked boxes and old furniture against the wall, creating a makeshift barrier that effectively hid the narrow door behind it. Marcus began moving items aside, curious about what additional storage space might exist in the house. The door itself was unremarkable, painted white like the surrounding walls, with a simple brass handle that had tarnished with age. But the heavy padlock securing it was clearly newer than the rest of the hardware, its silver surface unmarked by rust or wear. Marcus tugged at it experimentally, but it held firm. He played his flashlight beam around the frame, looking for any indication of what lay beyond. The door was solid wood, thick enough to muffle sound effectively. No light seeped through the gap at the bottom. It could be another storage room, or perhaps access to mechanical systems. Old houses often had strange architectural quirks, spaces that served purposes long forgotten. Marcus made a note to ask the neighbors about the room tomorrow. Someone in the area might remember Harold Brennan well enough to know about his unusual security measures. For now, he had plenty of other concerns to occupy his attention. He was turning away when he heard it. A sound so faint, he almost dismissed it as the house settling or wind in the eaves. But something made him pause, made him press his ear against the door and listen more carefully. Tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate strikes against wood, followed by silence. Marcus held his breath, wondering if his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him. The house was old, full of mysterious sounds and shifting timber. But the tapping came again, slightly different this time. 2 quick taps, then 3, then 2 again. The pattern was too regular to be random. Someone was on the other side of that door. Marcus's first instinct was to call the police, but something held him back. What if he was wrong? What if the sounds had an innocent explanation? He'd already dealt with enough embarrassment and scrutiny during Sarah's illness and death, when well-meaning neighbors and social workers had questioned his ability to care for Emma alone. The last thing he needed was to look unstable or paranoid in his new community. Instead, he knocked gently on the door. 3 soft raps, mimicking the pattern he'd heard. The response was immediate. 3 knocks answered his own, followed by what sounded like frantic scratching at the wood. And then, so quietly he almost missed it, came the voice. "Please, is someone there?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Young, female, desperate. Someone was trapped behind that door, and they'd been waiting for help that never came. Marcus's hands shook as he examined the padlock more closely. It was substantial, designed to keep people out or in. The implications made his stomach twist with nausea. Harold Brennan had been dead for 6 months. If someone had been locked in that room since then. "I'm here," Marcus called softly through the door. "I'm going to get you out. Can you tell me your name?" "Jessica," came the immediate reply. "My name is Jessica. There are 3 of us. Please don't leave us." 3 of them. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. This wasn't just one person trapped by accident. This was something else entirely, something that made his skin crawl with implications he didn't want to consider. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm not leaving," he promised, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm going to cut the lock. It might take a few minutes, but I'm not going anywhere." Marcus ran to his truck, grateful that he'd kept his tools close during the move. His hands fumbled with the combination on his toolbox as he searched for the bolt cutters. They were heavy-duty, designed for construction work, but he'd never been more grateful for their power. Back at the door, he positioned the cutters around the lock's shackle. The metal was harder than he'd expected, requiring several attempts, and all his strength to make progress. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Behind the door, he could hear whispered voices, urgent and frightened. When the lock finally gave way with a metallic snap, Marcus felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by apprehension. He had no idea what he was about to find, but he suspected it would change everything. The door opened inward, revealing a narrow wooden staircase that descended into blackness. The smell hit him immediately. Stale air, unwashed bodies, and something else he couldn't identify, but that made his stomach clench. Marcus played his flashlight beam down the steps, illuminating. Rough stone walls and a concrete floor below. "Jessica?" he called. "I'm coming down." The basement was smaller than he'd expected, carved out of the earth beneath the house's foundation. The ceiling was low, forcing Marcus to duck slightly as he descended. His flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing details that would haunt him for years to come. 3 mattresses lay on the floor, thin and stained. Buckets in the corner served purposes he didn't want to contemplate. Empty food containers and water bottles were stacked against one wall, and huddled together on the furthest mattress were 3 young women, blinking in the sudden light like nocturnal creatures disturbed from hiding. Jessica was the one who'd spoken. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair that hung limp around her shoulders. Her clothes were dirty and too large, as if they'd been chosen by someone else. The other 2 were younger, teenagers. Marcus guessed, with the same hollow-eyed look of people who'd been living in darkness for too long. "Are you police?" Jessica asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. Marcus shook his head, slowly approaching them with his hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm Marcus. I just bought this house. I live here now with my daughter." The second girl, blonde with a face that would have been pretty if not for the haunted expression in her eyes, spoke for the first time. "Harold's dead?" 6 months ago, Marcus confirmed. "How long have you been down here?" The 3 women exchanged glances, and Marcus saw a communication pass between them that spoke of shared trauma and mutual protection. Jessica seemed to be their spokesperson, the one who made decisions for the group. 2 years, she said simply. "Maybe longer. Time gets strange down here." 2 years. Marcus felt his knees go weak. These women had been prisoners while he'd been struggling through Sarah's illness and death, while Emma had been learning to walk and talk and navigate a world without her mother. They'd been suffering in darkness while life continued normally, just feet above their heads. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "We need to get you to a hospital, to the police." "No!" The third girl spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with panic. She was the youngest, perhaps 16, with red hair that caught the flashlight beam like copper wire. "You don't understand. He said if we ever left, if anyone ever found us, he'd hurt our families. He knows where they live." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. Harold Brennan was dead, but his influence apparently lived on in the fears he'd planted in these young women's minds. "He can't hurt anyone now," Marcus said gently. "He's gone. You're safe." But even as he said the words, he realized how hollow they must sound. These women had survived 2 years of captivity through caution and mistrust. They wouldn't simply accept the word of a stranger, no matter how sincere. Jessica studied his face in the flashlight's glow, and Marcus forced himself to remain still under her scrutiny. He could see her weighing options, calculating risks with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned that wrong choices carried devastating consequences. "You have a daughter?" she asked finally. Marcus nodded. "Emma, she's 6. She's sleeping upstairs." Something in Jessica's expression softened slightly. What happened to her mother? The question caught Marcus off guard, but he answered honestly. "Cancer. She died 8 months ago." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then she looked at her companions, and Marcus saw another silent conversation pass between them. "We can't just walk out of here," Jessica said finally. "We don't have anywhere to go. No identification, no money, and we don't know who might be looking for us or what Harold told people about us." Marcus understood her dilemma, but the thought of leaving them in this basement for even one more night was unbearable. "You can stay upstairs, in the house. There are plenty of bedrooms, and you'll be safe while we figure out what to do next." The blonde girl, she looked so young, Marcus thought with a pang, shook her head. "We've been hiding for so long. What if someone sees us? What if they ask questions?" "Then we'll answer them," Marcus said firmly. "The truth. You were kidnapped and held captive, and now you're free. There's no shame in being a victim." But even as he spoke, Marcus realized the situation was far more complicated than he'd initially grasped. These weren't just three women who needed rescue. They were three women who'd been systematically broken down and rebuilt in captivity, who'd learned to survive by making themselves invisible. The transition back to the world wouldn't be simple or quick. "My name is Marcus Williams," he said, settling cross-legged on the floor to appear less threatening. "I'm 34 years old. I used to run a construction company, but I lost everything when my wife got sick. This house was all I could afford after the medical bills and funeral costs. Emma and I moved in today, and we're trying to start over." Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed them pictures of Emma, of Sarah, of their old life before everything fell apart. "I'm not a perfect person, and I don't have all the answers. But I promise you this: as long as you're under my roof, you're safe. No one will hurt you, and no one will force you to do anything you don't want to do." Jessica took the wallet with trembling hands, studying the photographs in the flashlight's beam. The other two crowded close, their faces brightening slightly. At the sight of Emma's gap-toothed smile and Sarah's warm eyes, "She looks like a good mom," the redhead said softly. "She was," Marcus replied, his throat tight. "The best." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the house settling around them. Marcus waited, letting them process his offer without pressure. He'd learned patience during Sarah's illness, learned that healing couldn't be rushed or forced. Finally, Jessica handed back the wallet. "If we come upstairs," she said carefully, "what happens in the morning? What happens when people start asking questions?" Marcus considered this. It was a fair question, and one he didn't have a complete answer for. "We take it one day at a time," he said eventually. "We get you medical attention if you need it. We contact your families if you want us to. We figure out the legal stuff, but most importantly, we make sure you're safe and healthy and that you have choices again." The three women looked at each other once more, and Marcus could see the weight of the decision pressing down on them. They'd survived by being careful, by trusting no one, by assuming the worst of every situation. Asking them to take a leap of faith with a complete stranger was asking them to risk everything they'd fought to preserve. It was the youngest girl who broke the deadlock. "I want to see the stars," she said quietly. "I used to love looking at the stars, and I haven't seen them in so long." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to squeeze the girl's hand. "Okay, Megan, okay." The blonde girl nodded as well. "I'm Rebecca," she said to Marcus, "and I think I'd like to try trusting someone again." Marcus felt his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Then let's go upstairs," he said, standing and offering his hand to help them up. "Let's go see those stars." One by one, they climbed the narrow stairs that led from darkness into light. Jessica went first, then Rebecca, then Megan, with Marcus bringing up the rear. At the top, they stood blinking in the comparative brightness of the house's interior, three women taking their first steps toward freedom after 2 years of captivity. Marcus led them to the living room, where the moving boxes still sat scattered across the floor like monuments to new beginnings. He opened the curtains and raised the windows, letting in the cool night air and the sound of crickets chirping in the darkness. Then he stepped back and watched as Megan walked slowly to the window, pressed her face against the glass, and began to cry as she looked up at the stars she'd thought she might never see again. And in that moment, Marcus understood that rescuing these women wasn't just about giving them back their freedom. It was about learning to live again himself, about finding purpose in the wreckage of his old life. Emma needed a father who could show her that even in the darkest times, there was still hope. These women needed someone who understood that healing was possible, even after the worst kind of trauma. They all had a long way to go. There would be questions from authorities, complications with families, the slow work of rebuilding trust and confidence. There would be nights when the past felt more real than the present, when fear threatened to drag them back into darkness. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were free. And sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched three women discover the world again through his living room window. That was enough to begin with. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of 1247 Maple Street, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where four people sat in awkward silence. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd discovered. Jessica, Rebecca, and Megan huddled together on the old couch he'd hastily assembled the night before, sharing a single blanket and speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. Emma's footsteps on the stairs broke the tension. She appeared in the doorway, wearing her favorite purple pajamas, Chester clutched tight against her chest, her hair sticking up in directions that defied gravity. Her green eyes, so much like Sarah's, swept across the room and landed on the three strangers with the curious intensity that only children possessed. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Who are the ladies?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times during the sleepless hours before dawn, but none of his prepared explanations seemed adequate now. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the world contains monsters who steal people and lock them away? How do you explain that sometimes grown-ups hurt other grown-ups for reasons that make no sense? "These are our new friends," Marcus said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "They're going to stay with us for a while." Emma studied the three women with the unblinking stare that made adults uncomfortable, but which Marcus had learned to recognize as her way of processing new information. Megan, the youngest of the three, offered a tentative smile. Her red hair caught the morning light, and despite everything she'd endured, there was something gentle in her expression that seemed to resonate with Emma. "I like your bear," Megan said softly. "What's his name?" "Chester," Emma replied, holding the toy protectively. "He used to be my mummy's when she was little like me." The simple statement hung in the air, weighted with meaning that the adults understood, but Emma couldn't yet grasp. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and Jessica reached over to squeeze her hand. These women understood loss in ways that Marcus hoped Emma never would. "My mommy's in heaven now," Emma continued matter-of-factly, "but Daddy says she still watches over us." Megan nodded solemnly. "I bet she does. Mommies are good at that." Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The stiffness began to ease as Emma, with the fearless curiosity of childhood, broke down barriers that adults might have spent hours navigating. She approached the couch slowly, Chester still clutched in her arms. "Are you sad?" she asked Jessica, directly. Jessica's breath caught. In 2 years of captivity, no one had asked her such a simple, honest question. Adults always wanted to know details, facts, evidence, but this child simply wanted to know if she was hurting. "Yes," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm very sad, but I'm also happy to be here with you and your daddy." Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "When I'm sad, Daddy makes pancakes. They don't fix the sad, but they make it smaller." Marcus felt his throat constrict. Even in her innocent way, Emma understood that some pain couldn't be erased, only managed. It was a lesson he was still learning himself. "Would you like me to make pancakes?" Marcus asked, grateful for something practical to focus on. The three women exchanged glances, another of their silent communications. Marcus was beginning to recognize these moments, the way they checked with each other before making even the smallest decisions. Trust would have to be rebuilt, one choice at a time. "We don't want to be any trouble," Rebecca said quietly. "You're not trouble," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You're friends. Friends always get pancakes." And so, Marcus found himself in the kitchen, mixing batter, while Emma sat on the counter beside him, swinging her legs and chattering about everything and nothing. Through the doorway, he could see the three women talking quietly among themselves, their voices gradually growing stronger as they grew more comfortable in the space. The gas had been turned on that morning, one of the few things that had gone according to plan in Marcus's new life. The ancient stove took several attempts to light, but eventually blue flames danced beneath the cast-iron skillet that had been Sarah's grandmother's. Marcus had nearly sold it during the worst of their financial troubles, but Sarah had begged him to keep it. Now he was grateful for her sentimentality. "Can I help?" Megan appeared in the kitchen doorway, her question tentative but hopeful. "Of course," Marcus said, making room at the counter. "Emma's the pancake supervisor, but we can always use more hands." Megan approached slowly, and Marcus noticed how she moved, always checking exits, always positioning herself where she could see everyone in the room. The habits of survival were deeply ingrained, but she was making an effort to push past them. Emma immediately began explaining the pancake-making process with the authority of someone who'd been Marcus's kitchen assistant since she could stand on a chair. "First you mix the powder stuff, then you add the milk, then you have to stir it exactly 17 times or it gets lumpy." "Exactly 17?" Megan asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Well, maybe 16 or 18, Emma conceded, but definitely not 15 or 19. Megan laughed, the sound so unexpected that it made everyone freeze for a moment. It was the first real laughter that had echoed through the house since Marcus and Emma had arrived, and it seemed to surprise Megan most of all. "Sorry," she said quickly, the smile fading from her face. "Don't apologize for laughing," Marcus said firmly. "This house needs more laughter." As they cooked together, Marcus learned fragments of their stories, not the terrible details. Those would come later, in official statements and therapy sessions, but the smaller truths that revealed who these women had been before their world went dark. Jessica had been a college student, studying to be a teacher. She'd been walking home from her job at the campus library when Harold Brennan had offered her a ride during a rainstorm. Rebecca had been 16, a high school junior who'd been grabbed from a bus stop after staying late for drama club rehearsal. Megan had been the youngest, only 14, when she'd been taken from a grocery store parking lot while her mother ran back inside for something she'd forgotten. Each story was a reminder of how easily normal life could be shattered, how predators move through the world disguised as helpful strangers. Marcus thought of Emma's trusting nature, her willingness to approach these women without fear, and felt a chill of protective terror. The world was full of Harold Brennans, and keeping Emma safe would require constant vigilance. But he also saw something else in these women's survival. They'd protected each other, created a family unit that had sustained them through unimaginable circumstances. Jessica had taught Rebecca advanced math using problems she remembered from her college courses. Rebecca had shared stories and songs that helped pass the endless hours. Megan had created elaborate fantasy worlds that provided escape when reality became too heavy to bear. They'd found ways to maintain their humanity in an inhuman situation, and that gave Marcus hope. If they could survive 2 years in that basement and still be capable of laughter, of kindness, of trust, then perhaps healing was possible. The pancakes were nearly ready when they heard a knock at the front door. All 4 adults froze, and Marcus saw the 3 women instinctively move closer. Together, the knock came again, followed by a cheerful voice calling through the wood. "Marcus, it's Dorothy Chen from next door. I brought a casserole." Marcus recognized the name from the brief introductions he'd exchanged with neighbors the day before. Dorothy was a retired teacher who lived in the blue house with the perfectly maintained garden. She'd seemed kind but curious, the type of neighbor who would know everyone's business within a week of their arrival. "Go upstairs," Marcus said quietly to the 3 women. "I'll get rid of her." But Jessica shook her head. "We can't hide forever, and if we're going to stay here, people will see us eventually." "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," Marcus insisted. "Maybe we are ready," Rebecca said, though her voice shook slightly. Maybe it's time to try being normal people again. Emma, oblivious to the tension, had already run to answer the door. Marcus hurried after her, reaching the entrance just as she pulled it open to reveal a small, energetic woman in her 60s holding a covered dish. "Well, hello there, sweetie," Dorothy said to Emma, then looked up at Marcus. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to welcome you properly to the neighborhood." "That's very kind," Marcus said, accepting the casserole dish. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" The invitation surprised him as much as it surprised Dorothy, but somehow it felt like the right thing to do. If the three women were going to integrate back into normal society, they needed to start somewhere. A neighborly visit was as good a beginning as any. Dorothy stepped into the living room and immediately noticed the three women standing awkwardly near the stairs. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained friendly and curious rather than suspicious. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was their first real test, the first time they'd have to present themselves to the outside world. He looked at Jessica, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "These are Jessica, Rebecca, and Megan," Marcus said. "They're staying with us for a while." Dorothy's social radar was clearly pinging, but she was too polite to ask direct questions. Instead, she smiled warmly and extended her hand to each woman in turn. "How lovely to meet you all. Are you family?" It was Jessica who answered, her voice steady despite the tremor Marcus could detect underneath. "We're friends. Marcus is helping us get back on our feet." It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Dorothy seemed to sense there was more to the story, but she had the wisdom not to pry. "Well, that's wonderful," she said. "The neighborhood can always use more friendly faces. Have you had a chance to explore the area yet?" The question was innocent enough, but Marcus saw Rebecca flinch slightly. The idea of exploring, of moving freely through the world, was still overwhelming after 2 years of confinement. "We're taking things slowly," Megan said, surprising everyone with her response. "It's all very new to us." Dorothy nodded understandingly. "Moving to a new place can be overwhelming. I've lived here for 30 years, and I'm still discovering new things about the neighborhood." Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the patience of a child who sensed important things were being discussed, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you want to see my room? Daddy let me pick which one I wanted, and it has a really big tree outside the window." "I'd love to see it," Dorothy said, allowing Emma to take her hand and lead her toward the stairs. As they climbed to the second floor, Marcus heard Emma chattering about the house's history, the boarding house story he'd shared with her the night before. Her innocent enthusiasm was the perfect cover for the adult's awkwardness, and Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for his daughter's natural social instincts. While Dorothy was upstairs admiring Emma's room and exclaiming over the view of the oak tree, the three women began to relax slightly. They moved around the living room more, naturally, no longer clustering together like frightened animals. "She seems nice," Rebecca said quietly. "Most people are nice," Jessica replied. "That's what made it so easy for Harold to trick us. He seemed nice too." The statement hung heavy in the air, a reminder that trust would be a complicated thing. For these women, they'd have to learn to navigate a world where kindness could be genuine or manipulative, where safety was never guaranteed. When Dorothy and Emma returned downstairs, the older woman's eyes were bright with curiosity, but she maintained her polite distance from topics that might be sensitive. "You have a lovely home," she said to Marcus. "This old place has such character. Harold never really took care of it properly, but I can see you're already making improvements." At the mention of Harold's name, Marcus saw all three women tense. Dorothy noticed the reaction but misinterpreted it. "Oh, don't worry about the local gossip," she said kindly. Harold was eccentric, but people will be happy to see the house occupied by a nice family again. Marcus wondered what the neighborhood gossip had been about Harold Brennan. Had anyone suspected? Had there been signs that people had chosen to ignore? The questions would haunt him, but this wasn't the time or place to pursue them. "Did you know Harold well?" Jessica asked, her voice carefully neutral. Dorothy considered the question. "Not really. He kept to himself mostly. Very private man. He'd lived here since he was young, inherited the house from his parents. Never married, no children that anyone knew of. He was polite enough when you saw him around, but he didn't socialize much." She paused, seeming to realize she might be speaking ill of the dead. "I suppose everyone has their own way of living. Some people just prefer solitude." Marcus exchanged a glance with Jessica. Harold's solitude had been anything but innocent, but Dorothy couldn't have known that. How many neighbors lived next to secrets they couldn't imagine? How many monsters hid behind the facade of ordinary life? "Well," Dorothy said, glancing at her watch, "I should let you all get back to your settling in. Marcus, if you need anything, recommendations for local services, directions around town, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. And ladies," she turned to address the three women directly, "I hope you'll feel welcome here. This is a good neighborhood, full of people who look out for each other." After Dorothy left, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if passing their first social test had proven something important to all of them. Emma resumed her position as pancake supervisor, and the kitchen filled with the comfortable sounds of cooking and quiet conversation. "She was nice," Megan said, echoing Rebecca's earlier assessment. "She was," Jessica agreed, "but we need to be careful about how much we tell people, at least until we understand the legal situation better." Marcus nodded. "We'll need to contact the police eventually, and probably the FBI since this crosses state lines and involves kidnapping. But we can take some time to figure out how to handle it." The mention of law enforcement made all three women visibly nervous, and Marcus understood why. They'd been victims, but they'd also been missing persons for 2 years. There would be questions about why they hadn't escaped sooner, assumptions about their mental state, judgments about their choices. The criminal justice system wasn't always kind to victims, especially ones whose stories were complicated. "What if they don't believe us?" Rebecca asked quietly. "They'll believe you," Marcus said firmly. "There's evidence. The basement, the restraints, the conditions you were kept in. Harold's dead, so he can't contradict your story, and you have each other to corroborate what happened." But even as he said the words, Marcus realized how naive they might sound. He'd never been a victim of violent crime, never had to navigate the complex intersection of law enforcement, media attention, and public skepticism. These women had survived 2 years of captivity. He couldn't presume to understand what they might face in the outside world. As they ate breakfast together, the pancakes were slightly lumpy despite Emma's careful count, but no one complained. Marcus found himself studying the three women more closely. In the morning light, he could see details that had been hidden in the basement's shadows. Jessica had scars on her wrists, faint but visible. Rebecca's hair had been cut roughly, as if with dull scissors. Megan's clothes hung loose on her frame, suggesting significant weight loss. But he also saw signs of resilience, the way Jessica instinctively checked on her companions, making sure they were eating enough. The protective way Rebecca positioned herself between Megan and any potential threat. The quiet strength in Megan's voice when she spoke about wanting to see the stars again. These weren't broken women, Marcus realized. They were survivors who had adapted to impossible circumstances and maintained their essential humanity despite everything that had been done to them. They would need support, certainly, medical care, counseling, legal assistance, but they weren't fragile victims waiting to be rescued. They were strong people who had rescued themselves, who had kept each other alive through sheer will and mutual care. After breakfast, Marcus showed them around the house properly. Emma insisted on being the tour guide, pointing out important features like the window seat in the front parlor where she planned to read books, and the dumbwaiter that connected the kitchen to the upper floors. It's how they used to send food upstairs when this was a boarding house, Emma explained importantly. Daddy says it doesn't work anymore, but maybe we can fix it. The three women explored cautiously at first, but gradually began to show genuine interest in their surroundings. Jessica ran her fingers along the built-in bookshelves in what had once been the library. Rebecca examined the ornate light fixtures with an artist's eye for detail. Megan gravitated toward the windows, still marveling at the ability to see outside, to watch the world beyond four walls. There are so many rooms, Rebecca said wonderingly. 12 bedrooms originally, Marcus confirmed, though some have been converted to other uses over the years. You can each have your own space, or share if you prefer, whatever makes you most comfortable. The concept of choice seemed to overwhelm them momentarily. After 2 years of having every decision made for them, the freedom to choose something as simple as where to sleep was both liberating and paralyzing. We've been together so long, Megan said quietly. I don't know if I can sleep alone. Then don't, Marcus said simply. There's no rule that says you have to separate just because you can. Do whatever feels right. They settled on 2 adjoining rooms on the second floor with a connecting door that could be left open. Jessica would have one room to herself, while Rebecca and Megan would share the other. It was a compromise that honored their need for independence, while maintaining the support system that had sustained them. As the morning progressed, more neighbors stopped by. Word had apparently spread quickly about the new residents of 1247 Maple Street, and the small community seemed eager to welcome them. Each visit was a test, another opportunity to practice the art of appearing normal while carrying enormous secrets. Mrs. Patterson from across the street brought fresh bread and stayed long enough to share neighborhood gossip. The Rodriguez family from 2 houses down offered to help with yard work and mentioned their teenage daughter who loved babysitting. Mr. Kim, an elderly widower who lived alone in the corner house, simply wanted to introduce himself and offer assistance with any electrical or plumbing issues. Each interaction was carefully navigated, with Marcus taking the lead, but the 3 women gradually participating more naturally. Emma continued to be their secret weapon, her innocent chatter filling awkward silences and her obvious affection for the new friends helping to normalize their presence in the house. By afternoon, Marcus realized they'd created something unexpected, the appearance of a functioning household. To outside observers, they looked like an extended family or a group of friends sharing living space. The truth was far more complex, but the facade was surprisingly convincing. We should go shopping, Jessica said as they cleaned up after lunch. We need clothes, basic toiletries, things to make this feel more like home. The suggestion surprised Marcus. He'd expected them to want to stay hidden, to avoid public spaces where they might be recognized or questioned. But Jessica seemed determined to reclaim normal activities. Are you sure you're ready for that? He asked gently. No, she admitted, but I don't think I'll ever feel ready. Sometimes you just have to do things anyway. Rebecca and Megan exchanged glances, their silent communication system still functioning. After a moment, Rebecca nodded. I'd like to pick out my own clothes again, she said. It's been so long since I could choose something just because I liked it. And so Marcus found himself loading his truck with 4 passengers, 3 women, who were taking their first voluntary trip outside in 2 years, and 1 6-year-old who was excited about the adventure of shopping with new friends. The local department store was busy, but not overwhelming, filled with the casual chaos of Saturday afternoon shoppers. Marcus watched the three women carefully as they navigated the crowds, ready to intervene if anyone became uncomfortable. But they seemed to draw strength from each other, moving through the store with increasing confidence. Emma appointed herself as personal shopper, offering enthusiastic opinions on everything from color choices to style preferences. Her commentary was so entertaining that other shoppers began smiling and commenting on what a sweet little girl she was. The positive attention seemed to bolster everyone's confidence. "I haven't worn blue in so long," Megan said, holding up a simple sweater. "Harold said it didn't look good on me." "Harold was wrong about a lot of things," Jessica said firmly. "You look beautiful in blue." It was a small moment, but Marcus recognized its significance. They were beginning to reclaim pieces of themselves that had been systematically erased, making choices based on their own preferences rather than someone else's control. In the end, they bought far more than Marcus had budgeted for. But he didn't care. Watching Rebecca select books from the store's small reading section, seeing Megan choose art supplies with trembling excitement, observing Jessica pick out clothes that actually fit her properly, these purchases represented more than material goods. They were investments in the future, declarations that these women intended to live rather than merely survive. The ride home was different from the tense journey to the store. The truck was filled with shopping bags and quiet conversation, with Emma's running commentary on everything they'd bought and seen. The three women seemed more relaxed, more present in the moment, rather than constantly scanning for threats. "Thank you," Jessica said as they pulled into the driveway, "for everything, for trusting us, for including us, for treating us like people instead of problems to be solved." Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "You are people. Remarkable. Strong, brave people. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As they unloaded the truck and carried their purchases into the house, Marcus felt something shifting in the atmosphere of 1247 Maple Street. It was starting to feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home, not just for him and Emma, but for all of them. That evening, as Emma played with her toys and the three women organized their new belongings, Marcus stood at the kitchen window and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalk, while parents watched from front porches. Dogs barked in friendly greeting as neighbors walked by. Life continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the miracle of healing happening inside his house. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have responded to this situation. She'd always been the one with the generous heart, the one who brought home stray animals and befriended lonely neighbors. She would have opened their home without hesitation, would have known instinctively how to help these women heal. Marcus didn't have Sarah's natural gifts for nurturing, but he had her memory to guide him. He had Emma's innocent acceptance to smooth the way. And most importantly, he had the growing conviction that sometimes people found each other not by accident, but because the universe knew they needed each other. The house on Maple Street had witnessed terrible things, had harbored secrets that should never have existed. But it was also becoming something new, a place where broken people could learn to be whole again, where trust could be rebuilt one small choice at a time, where the future could be different from the past. As he watched Emma show Rebecca how to braid Chester's fur, while Jessica and Megan discussed plans for planting a garden in the backyard, Marcus allowed himself to hope that they were all exactly where they needed to be. 2 weeks had passed since the three women had emerged from the basement, and the house on Maple Street had settled into an unusual but comfortable rhythm. Morning coffee was shared in the kitchen while Emma ate cereal and chatted about her dreams. Afternoons were spent on small projects around the house, each woman finding her own way to contribute to their makeshift family. Evenings brought quiet conversations on the front porch as they watched the neighborhood wind down for the night. Marcus had thought they might have more time before the outside world intruded, But Detective Rachel Morrison's arrival on a sunny Tuesday morning changed everything. She stood on the front porch in a crisp navy suit, her badge gleaming in the morning light, with an expression that was both professional and compassionate. "Mr. Williams, I'm Detective Morrison with the State Police. I'd like to speak with you about some information we've received regarding this property." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Through the window, he could see Jessica freeze in the middle of watering the plants they'd bought for the front room. Rebecca's hand stilled on the book she'd been reading to Emma. Megan looked up from the puzzle they'd been working on together, her face pale with sudden fear. "Of course," Marcus said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him. "What kind of information?" Detective Morrison studied his face carefully. "We've had reports of suspicious activity at this address. People coming and going at unusual hours. Neighbors are concerned about what might be happening inside." Marcus realized that their attempts at normalcy had backfired. In a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, the sudden appearance of 3 unknown women had generated exactly the kind of attention they'd hoped to avoid. "The women staying here," Marcus said carefully. "They're friends who needed a place to stay. There's nothing suspicious about it." "I'm sure that's true," Detective Morrison said, her tone remaining neutral. "But I'm required to follow up on reports like this. Would it be possible to speak with them?" Before Marcus could respond, the front door opened and Jessica stepped out. Her hands were steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she positioned herself, where she could see both the detective and potential escape routes. "Detective Morrison?" Jessica said. "I'm Jessica Chen. I think you're here because of me." The detective's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ms. Chen, you were reported missing from the university 2 years ago. Your family has been looking for you." Jessica's composure wavered for just a moment before she straightened her spine. "I know, and I'm ready to tell you what happened. But first, I need you to understand that the other women with me have been through trauma. They're going to need time and support." "Other women." Detective Morrison's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. "How many people are we talking about?" "3 of us total," Jessica said. "We were all taken by Harold Brennan, the previous owner of this house. He kept us in the basement for 2 years until he died, and Marcus found us." The weight of the statement settled over the porch like a heavy blanket. Detective Morrison reached for her phone, then stopped, seeming to realize that this conversation required more delicacy than a standard police report. "Ms. Chen, I need to ask you to come to the station for a formal interview. We'll need statements from all of you, medical examinations, evidence collection. This is going to become a very large investigation very quickly." Jessica nodded, but her hands were shaking now. "I understand. But please, can we do this in a way that doesn't traumatize Rebecca and Megan any more than necessary? They're younger, and they've been through enough." Through the window, Marcus could see Emma looking between the adults with the wide-eyed concern of a child who sensed that something important was happening but couldn't understand what. Rebecca had her arm around the little girl protectively, while Megan stood frozen in the doorway between the living room and kitchen. "Let me make some calls," Detective Morrison said, her voice gentler now. "We're going to need victim services, medical personnel, FBI involvement, since this involves kidnapping. But I want you to know that we'll do everything we can to handle this sensitively." As the detective stepped away to use her phone, Jessica sagged against the porch railing. Marcus moved to support her, seeing the toll that maintaining her composure had taken. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "No," Jessica admitted, "but I'm tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid that someone will figure out who we are and send us back to families who might not understand. Tired of feeling like we're lying to everyone who's been kind to us." Through the front window, they could see Rebecca helping Emma with her puzzle while keeping one eye on the porch conversation. Megan had disappeared entirely, probably retreating to the safety of the upstairs rooms. "We knew this day would come," Marcus said. "You've been preparing for it." "Have we?" Jessica asked. "I mean, we've talked about it, planned for it. But now that it's here, I don't feel prepared at all. I feel like that scared girl who got grabbed outside the library." Detective Morrison returned, slipping her phone back into her jacket pocket. "I've spoken with my supervisor and victim services. We're going to set up interviews at the hospital rather than the police station. More comfortable environment, and we'll have medical staff on hand. We can start this afternoon if you're ready." Jessica took a deep breath. "We're ready, but I want Marcus there. He's the one who found us, and he's been taking care of us. We trust him." "That's fine," the detective said. "Mr. Williams, you'll need to give a statement as well about the discovery of the basement and the condition you found them in." As Detective Morrison left with promises to return in a few hours with a victim services coordinator, Marcus and Jessica went back inside to face the others. Emma immediately ran to Jessica, wrapping her small arms around the woman's waist. "Are you in trouble?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against Jessica's shirt. "No, sweetheart," Jessica said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "But some police officers need to ask us questions about things that happened before we came to live here. It might take a while." Emma's brow furrowed with concentration. "Are they going to take you away?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that made all the adults uncomfortable. Rebecca and Megan had emerged from wherever they'd been hiding, and they gathered around Jessica and Emma like a family unit seeking reassurance. "Nobody's taking anyone away," Marcus said firmly. "We're all going to the hospital together to talk to some people who want to help. Then we're coming home." "Together?" Megan asked quietly. "Together," Marcus confirmed. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and anxiety. The three women showered and dressed carefully, as if preparing for battle. They packed a small bag with essentials, including the new clothes they'd bought on their shopping trip. Jessica wrote down phone numbers and important information, while Rebecca and Megan clung to each other with the desperate intensity of people who'd learned not to take togetherness for granted. Emma seemed to absorb the adult tension, becoming quieter and more clingy than usual. She insisted on bringing Chester and a coloring book, as if these talismans might provide protection against whatever was coming. When Detective Morrison returned with Dr. Sarah Kim from Victim Services and a social worker named Janet Rodriguez, the house felt suddenly crowded with official concern. The professionals were kind but thorough, explaining the process they would follow and the support services available. "The most important thing," Dr. Kim said, addressing all three women, "is that you maintain control over this process as much as possible. You decide how much to share and when. You decide who you want and present during interviews. This is about reclaiming your power, not giving it away to another system." Rebecca spoke for the first time since the detective's arrival. "What about our families? Will they be told immediately?" "That's up to you," Janet said gently. "We can contact them when you're ready. Help facilitate those reunions when you feel prepared. There's no timeline except your own." The drive to the hospital was tense, despite everyone's efforts to keep things normal. Emma sat between Marcus and Jessica in the front seat, chattering nervously about everything she saw outside the windows. In the back, Rebecca and Megan held hands and spoke in whispers, their words too quiet for Marcus to hear, but their tones suggesting mutual encouragement. The hospital had prepared a private wing for the interviews, away from the normal bustle of emergency rooms and public areas. It felt more like a comfortable office building than a medical facility, which seemed to help everyone relax slightly. The medical examinations came first, conducted by Dr. Patricia Sanchez, a specialist in trauma medicine who had extensive experience with assault victims. She was gentle but thorough, documenting evidence that would be crucial for any eventual prosecution of Harold Brennan's crimes. Even though the perpetrator is deceased, Dr. Sanchez explained to Marcus while the women were being examined, it's important to have complete medical records. There may be other victims we don't know about yet, and this evidence could help identify patterns or provide closure for other families. Marcus waited in a small family room with Emma, who had grown increasingly agitated as the day wore on. She colored furiously in her book, pressing the crayons so hard that they broke repeatedly. "When are Jessica and Rebecca and Megan coming back?" she asked for the 10th time. "Soon, sweetheart," Marcus said, though he had no real idea how long the process would take. "They're talking to doctors who want to make sure they're healthy. Like when Mommy was sick?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Emma rarely mentioned Sarah's illness directly, and when she did, it was usually in the context of trying to understand other people's pain. "Not exactly like that," Marcus said carefully. "Jessica and Rebecca and Megan aren't sick the way Mommy was. But sometimes when bad things happen to people, doctors need to check to make sure they're okay." Emma nodded solemnly, then returned to her aggressive coloring. Marcus could see her working through emotions she didn't have words for, trying to process the adult tensions swirling around her. When the medical examinations were complete, the formal interviews began. Each woman spoke with Detective Morrison and an FBI agent who had arrived from the regional office. Marcus was allowed to be present for Jessica's interview, as she had requested, but Rebecca and Megan chose to have only the victim services coordinator with them. Jessica's account was detailed and methodical. She described the night she was taken, the conditions in the basement, the psychological manipulation Harold had used to control them. She spoke about the daily routines they'd developed to maintain their sanity, the ways they'd supported each other through the worst moments. "He told us our families had given up looking," Jessica said, her voice steady but hollow. "He showed us fake newspaper articles about how the investigations had been closed, how everyone assumed we were dead. We knew he was probably lying, but after a while, it became easier to believe him than to hope." Detective Morrison took careful notes, asking clarifying questions, but never pushing for details that Jessica seemed reluctant to provide. The FBI agent focused on potential connections to other cases, wanting to know if Harold had mentioned other victims or if the women had heard evidence of additional crimes. "There were rooms in the basement we were never allowed to enter," Jessica said. "Harold kept them locked, said they contained things that weren't our concern, but sometimes we heard sounds from those areas. Voices, maybe, or movement. We were never sure if it was real or if isolation was making us imagine things." Marcus felt sick as he listened to the interview. The scope of Harold Brennan's crimes might be far larger than they'd initially realized. The basement they'd been kept in could be just one part of a more extensive operation. When Jessica's interview concluded, she looked drained but relieved. "It feels strange to say it all out loud," she told Marcus as they waited for Rebecca and Megan to finish their sessions. "For 2 years, the only people I could talk to about it were Rebecca and Megan. Having other people know makes it feel more real somehow." Emma had fallen asleep in Marcus's lap, exhausted by the day's emotional intensity. He stroked her hair gently, thinking about how dramatically their lives had changed in just 2 weeks. They'd gone from being a father and daughter trying to start over after loss to being part of something much larger and more complex. Rebecca emerged from her interview pale but composed. She sat down next to Jessica without speaking, but they held hands with the unconscious intimacy of people who'd survived trauma together. Megan took longer, and when she finally came out, her eyes were red from crying. "They believe us," Megan said, sinking into a chair across from the others. "I was so afraid they wouldn't believe us." Dr. Kim joined them in the waiting area. carrying a folder of information and resources. "The interviews are complete for today," she said. "We'll need follow-up sessions as the investigation progresses, but you've done the hardest part. You've told your stories." She handed each woman a packet of information about trauma counseling, support groups, and legal assistance. "These are resources available to you. Some are local, others are specialized programs for survivors of long-term captivity. You don't have to decide about anything right now, but I want you to know what's available." Detective Morrison approached the group with an update from the crime scene team that had been processing the basement. "We found evidence of at least 2 other victims," she said quietly. "Personal items, clothing, things that suggest other women were held there at different times. We're going to need you to look at some photographs when you're ready. See if you recognize anything or remember Harold mentioning other people." The revelation hit the 3 women like a physical blow. They'd known they weren't Harold's first victims, but having it confirmed made their survival feel even more miraculous, and their responsibility as witnesses even heavier. "How many?" Rebecca asked quietly. "We don't know yet," Detective Morrison admitted. "The investigation is just beginning, but your testimony is going to be crucial for bringing closure to other families, for understanding the full scope of what happened." The drive home was quiet except for Emma's chatter as she woke up and processed the strange day. The 3 women seemed lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the reality that their ordeal was part of something much larger than they'd realized. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked Jessica as they pulled into the driveway of their house. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I feel empty and full at the same time. Empty because I've been carrying these secrets for so long, and now they're not just mine anymore. Full because I finally said them out loud, and people listened, and they believed me." Inside the house, they moved through the evening routine they'd established over the past 2 weeks. Dinner was quiet, with Emma providing most of the conversation as she described her day to her stuffed animals. The adults ate mechanically, still processing everything that had happened. After Emma was tucked into bed, the 4 adults sat in the living room with the kind of exhausted silence that comes after emotional marathons. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its normal evening rhythm, unaware that the quiet house on Maple Street had become the center of a major criminal investigation. "What happens now?" Megan asked eventually. "Now we keep living," Jessica said. "We keep building the life we want, and we help the police when they need us, and we try to heal. The media will probably find out soon," Marcus said. "Missing persons cases that get solved after 2 years, especially involving multiple victims, tend to generate a lot of attention." Rebecca shuddered. "I hadn't thought about that. People knowing our names, our faces. We'll deal with it when it happens," Jessica said firmly. "We've survived worse than nosy reporters." As the evening progressed, Marcus noticed that despite their exhaustion, none of the women seemed ready to go upstairs to bed. They lingered in the living room, reluctant to end the day that had marked such a significant transition in their lives. "I keep thinking about my parents," Megan said suddenly. "For 2 years, I've imagined what it would be like to see them again. Now that it's actually going to happen, I'm terrified." "Terrified of what?" Rebecca asked gently. "That I'm not the same person they remember, that they won't understand what I've been through, that they'll expect me to just pick up where I left off, like nothing happened." Ooh, it was a fear that all 3 women shared, Marcus realized. They'd been changed by their experiences in ways that couldn't be undone. The families they returned to would be changed too, shaped by 2 years of grief and uncertainty. The reunions, everyone was hoping for, might be more complicated than anyone expected. "You don't have to see them until you're ready," Marcus said. Dr. Kim was clear about that. "You control the timeline." But at some point, I will have to face them, Megan said. And I don't know how to explain what it was like, or why we didn't try harder to escape, or how we survived by depending on each other instead of hoping for rescue. Jessica reached over and took Megan's hand. We survived by taking care of each other. There's no shame in that. We did what we had to do with the choices we had. Harold made sure we understood that trying to escape would put our families in danger, Rebecca added. He convinced us that our compliance was protecting the people we loved. That wasn't weakness. It was love. The conversation continued late into the night, the three women processing emotions they'd kept buried for years, while Marcus listened and offered support when they needed it. Emma slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that the adults were working through trauma that would shape all their futures. As the clock struck midnight, marking the end of a day that had changed everything, Marcus looked around at the three women, who had become his responsibility and his family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media attention, family reunions, ongoing investigation demands. But tonight, they were safe in the house on Maple Street, surrounded by people who understood and accepted them. We should try to get some sleep, Jessica said eventually, though she made no move to leave her chair. 5 more minutes, Megan said, echoing something Emma often said when bedtime arrived. And so they sat together in the quiet house. 4 people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy, taking comfort in shared presence as they prepared to face whatever came next. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that heroes lived among them. Women who had survived the unthinkable, and a man who had chosen to open his home and heart to strangers in need. The healing was far from complete, and the challenges ahead were enormous. But in that moment, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a house at rest, they all understood that they had already accomplished something miraculous. They had found each other. They had chosen to trust. They had built a family from the fragments of broken lives. And that, Marcus thought as he finally convinced everyone to head upstairs for the night, was a pretty good foundation for whatever came next. The media vans began arriving on Thursday morning, 3 days after the police interviews. Marcus woke to the sound of voices outside his bedroom window and the unmistakable whir of camera equipment being assembled on the street. When he peered through the curtains, he counted at least 6 news crews setting up on the sidewalk, their bright lights already attracting curious neighbors. "Daddy, why are there so many cars outside?" Emma's voice came from behind him as she padded into his room, still wearing her unicorn pajamas and dragging Chester by one worn ear. Marcus scooped her up before she could look out the window. "Some news people want to talk about our friends," he said carefully. "But we don't have to talk to them if we don't want to." Downstairs, he could hear the 3 women moving around. The kitchen, their voices tense with discussion. When Marcus carried Emma down for breakfast, he found them clustered around the back window, watching more reporters position themselves in the alley behind the house. "They're everywhere," Rebecca said, her voice tight with anxiety. "How did they find out so quickly?" Jessica held a cup of coffee with both hands, as if drawing warmth from it. Police reports become public record eventually, and missing persons, cases that get solved, always attract attention. "My phone's been ringing since 5 a.m., Megan added, gesturing toward the device they'd bought her during their shopping trip. "Numbers I don't recognize, probably reporters trying to get through." Marcus set Emma down and moved to the front window, carefully staying out of sight as he assessed the situation. The crowd was growing larger by the hour. He recognized the logos of local news stations, but there were also vans from national networks. This wasn't just a local interest story anymore. "We need a plan," he said, returning to the kitchen. "We can't be prisoners in our own house, but we also don't have to feed the circus if we don't want to." Emma, who had been listening with the intense focus she applied to adult conversations she sensed were important, suddenly spoke up. Are the news people going to take Jessica and Rebecca and Megan away? The question hit the adults like a slap. In her 6-year-old understanding, Emma had identified the core fear that none of them had voiced directly. The attention could change everything about their carefully constructed new life. "No one's taking anyone anywhere," Marcus said firmly. But even as he spoke, he wondered if he could keep that promise. The 3 women were no longer just his house guests. They were key witnesses in a major criminal investigation, missing persons whose families had been searching for them for years, symbols of survival that the public would want to claim and celebrate. A sharp knock on the front door interrupted his thoughts. Through the frosted glass, Marcus could see the silhouette of someone in a business suit, flanked by what appeared to be camera equipment. "Mr. Williams?" a voice called through the door. "This is Linda Chen from Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about the remarkable story unfolding in your home." Marcus motioned for everyone to stay quiet and moved away from the door. But the reporter persisted, her voice carrying clearly through the wood. "We know about the 3 women you're sheltering, Mr. Williams. The public has a right to know about this story of survival and heroism. Wouldn't you like the chance to tell it properly?" "Heroism," Jessica repeated quietly, her voice bitter. "Is that what they're calling it?" "They don't understand," Rebecca said. "They think surviving makes us heroes, but they don't know what we had to do to survive, what we had to become." The phone rang, startling everyone. Marcus checked the caller ID and saw another unfamiliar number. He let it go to voicemail, but within seconds, it was ringing again. "This is insane," Megan said, moving away from the windows as more people gathered outside. "I thought telling the police would be the hard part. I didn't think about this." Emma had grown very quiet, sensing the adult tension, but not understanding its source. She climbed onto Jessica's lap, offering her the comfort of Chester's familiar presence. "What if we just talked to one reporter?" Emma suggested seriously. "Then maybe the others would go away." The adults exchanged glances over her head. Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. There was actually some wisdom in Emma's innocent suggestion. "It's not a bad idea," Jessica said slowly. "If we control the narrative, tell our story on our terms, maybe we can reduce the speculation and intrusion." "But which reporter?" Rebecca asked. "And what do we say? How much do we reveal?" Before anyone could answer, the phone rang again. This time, Marcus recognized the number as Detective Morrison's. "Mr. Williams, I'm calling to warn you about the media attention," the detective said without preamble. "Word leaked from the courthouse when we filed the initial paperwork. I'm sorry, I know this complicates things for you and the women. Any advice on how to handle it?" Marcus asked, putting the call on speaker so the others could hear. "You have no obligation to speak to anyone," Detective Morrison said. "But if you do decide to give a statement, I'd recommend working with victim services to prepare talking points. The last thing you want is to say something that compromises the investigation or causes more trauma." After the detective hung up, they sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the growing noise outside. More vehicles were arriving, and Marcus could hear the murmur of crowd conversation growing louder. "I want to see my parents," Megan said suddenly, her voice so quiet they almost missed it. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by the abrupt declaration. "I've been thinking about it all night," she continued, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been afraid of facing them, afraid of disappointing them, or not being the daughter they remember. But watching those people outside, knowing they're talking about us like we're characters in a story instead of real people. I want my family to hear the truth from me, not from strangers." Jessica reached across the table and took Megan's hand. "Are you sure? Once you make that call, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," Megan said, though her voice shook. "I need to stop being afraid of my own life." Rebecca nodded slowly. I think I want to call my parents too. Not because I'm ready to see them, but because they deserve to know I'm alive before they see it on the news." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing her friend's decisions. As the oldest and the de facto leader of their group, she felt responsible for their well-being. But she also understood that part of healing meant allowing each person to make their own choices, even when those choices felt scary. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll call your families. But we do it together, and we do it from here, with Marcus and Emma present. This is our home base, our safe space." Marcus felt a surge of emotion at Jessica's words. Somehow, without any formal declarations or legal agreements, the house on Maple Street had become exactly what she said, a home base for all of them. The first call was to Megan's parents in Ohio. Marcus dialed the number she provided with, shaking fingers, then handed her the phone. The ringing seemed to echo through the kitchen as everyone held their breath. "Mom!" Megan's voice cracked on the word. 2 years of separation and trauma compressed into that single syllable. The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a scream, then a man's voice, urgent and disbelieving, demanding to know if it was really her. "It's really me, Dad," Megan said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm alive, and I'm safe, and I'm sorry it took so long to call you." The conversation that followed was heartbreaking and beautiful in equal measure. Megan's parents had never stopped looking for her, never stopped hoping she was alive. They cried together over the phone, sharing 2 years of grief and relief, in a torrent of words and emotions. "Where are you?" her mother asked eventually. "We'll come get you right now." Megan glanced around the kitchen at Marcus, Emma, Jessica, and Rebecca, the people who had become her family in the aftermath of trauma. "I'm with people who are taking care of me," she said. "I'm not ready to leave yet, but I want to see you soon. Maybe you could come here." The logistics were complicated by the media circus outside, but Megan's parents were determined to reach their daughter. They would drive through the night if necessary, face whatever crowds or obstacles stood between them and their child. Rebecca's call to her family in Colorado went similarly, though her younger brother answered the phone first and had to be convinced that his sister's voice was real. The Davis family had moved twice since Rebecca's disappearance, unable to bear living in the house where they'd waited for news that never came. They'd divorced and remarried different people, their grief taking different forms, but never diminishing. "We never gave up," Rebecca's mother said through tears. "Even when the police said the trail was cold, even when people told us to accept that you were gone, we never stopped believing you'd come home." Jessica's call was the most difficult. Her parents had died in a car accident 6 months after her disappearance, their grief and desperate searching contributing to the distraction that caused the crash. The phone number she had memorized belonged to her younger sister, who had become the keeper of Jessica's memory and the advocate for continuing the search. "Jess," her sister's voice was hollow with disbelief. "They told me you were dead. They said they found evidence." "They were wrong," Jessica said simply. "I'm alive. Amy, I'm okay." "Well, I'm going to be okay." The reunion conversations continued for hours, each family processing shock and relief while trying to understand what their daughters had endured. Marcus found himself playing host to an emotional marathon, making coffee and sandwiches while the 3 women reconnected with the lives they'd been stolen from. Emma, sensing the importance of the moment but overwhelmed by the adult emotions swirling around her, eventually curled up in Marcus's lap and fell asleep. Her peaceful breathing provided a counterpoint to the tears and laughter filling the kitchen. By afternoon, the media crowd outside had grown even larger. News of the phone calls had somehow leaked, probably through family members too excited to maintain secrecy, and the story was now being reported as a developing situation with live updates. "We can't stay hidden in here forever," Marcus said, as they watched reporters interview neighbors who had no real information but were happy to speculate on camera. "I know," Jessica said, "and I think we need to take control of this before it gets even more out of hand." She turned to her companions, her expression resolute. "I want to give a statement, not an interview, not a conversation, just a brief statement to all of them at once. Something that establishes our position and asks for privacy while we heal." "Are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "Once we go out there, there's no hiding anymore." "We're not hiding now," Jessica pointed out. "We're just postponing the inevitable while letting other people control our story." Marcus admired her courage, even as he worried about the implications. These three women had survived 2 years of captivity through caution and careful calculation. Choosing to face the media circus required a different kind of bravery. "If you're going to do this," he said, "let's do it right. Let me call Dr. Kim and see if she can be here for support. And maybe Detective Morrison, so we have official backing." The preparations took the rest of the afternoon. Dr. Kim arrived with a legal advocate who helped Jessica craft a statement that provided enough information to satisfy public curiosity without compromising the ongoing investigation. Detective Morrison came with 2 uniformed officers who helped establish boundaries with the crowd. As evening approached, the media presence had swelled to include national network correspondents and online journalists. The quiet street looked like the site of a major news event, which Marcus realized it actually was. "Remember," Dr. Kim said as they prepared to go outside, "you control this interaction. You read your statement. You answer no questions. You go back inside. Don't let them pressure you into saying more than you're comfortable with." Emma had woken from her nap and was watching the preparations with wide eyes. "Are Jessica and Rebecca and Megan going to be on TV?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. "They're going to tell people that they're safe and that they want privacy while they get better. Like when I told Mrs. Patterson that Chester was sick and couldn't play that day." Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. "Exactly like that." When they finally emerged from the house, the crowd of reporters surged forward like a living thing. Camera flashes exploded in rapid succession, and dozens of voices shouted questions simultaneously. The uniformed officers held the crowd back, creating a small, clear space on the front porch. Jessica stepped forward, Rebecca and Megan flanking her on either side. Marcus stood behind them with Emma, ready to provide support if needed. The statement Jessica had prepared was brief and dignified. "My name is Jessica Chen. 2 years ago, I was abducted by Harold Brennan and held captive in the basement of this house, along with Rebecca Davis and Megan O'Sullivan. We were rescued when Marcus Williams purchased this property and discovered us. We are grateful to be free, and we are working with law enforcement to ensure that justice is served." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "We ask for privacy during this difficult time as we reunite with our families and begin the process of healing. We are not heroes, we are survivors, and we need space to rebuild our lives." The questions began immediately, a cacophony of voices trying to get personal details, emotional reactions, sensational quotes. But Jessica had said what she came to say. She turned and walked back toward the house, Rebecca and Megan close behind her. As they reached the front door, a reporter's voice cut through the noise, clear and insistent. "What about the man who saved you? How does it feel to be rescued by a single father who was struggling with his own losses?" Jessica stopped, her hand on the doorknob. For a moment, Marcus thought she would ignore the question and go inside, but then she turned back to face the crowd. "Marcus Williams didn't save us," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the sudden quiet. "We saved each other. He opened his home and his heart to 3 strangers because that's who he is." We chose to trust him because we recognize kindness when we saw it. Survival isn't about being rescued. It's about choosing to keep living and helping other people do the same. With that, she opened the door and they all went inside, leaving the reporters to process what they'd witnessed. Through the front window, Marcus could see the crowd beginning to disperse slightly. Some journalists rushing to file their stories, others settling in for what appeared to be a long-term siege. "How do you feel?" Dr. Kim asked Jessica as they gathered in the living room. "Exposed," Jessica said honestly, "but also relieved. I've been afraid of public attention for so long, imagining it would be worse than it actually was. Don't get me wrong, it was awful, but it was also a finite. I said what I needed to say, and now it's done." Emma, who had been unusually quiet during the media encounter, suddenly spoke up. "Jessica, you were really brave out there." "Thank you, sweetheart," Jessica said, pulling Emma onto her lap. "But you know what? You've been brave too. Having strangers in your house, sharing your daddy, dealing with all this craziness. You're pretty amazing." Emma beamed at the praise, then grew serious again. "Are Megan's and Rebecca's mommies and daddies coming here?" "Yes," Rebecca said. "Tomorrow, probably. Are you okay with that?" Emma considered this carefully. "Will there be enough room for everyone?" Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh. He'd managed all day. "We'll make room, Em. We've got plenty of bedrooms, remember?" As evening settled over the neighborhood, the immediate crisis of media attention had passed, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. The story would spread, generating more interest and scrutiny. The three women would face ongoing challenges as they navigated family reunions, legal proceedings, and the slow process of rebuilding their lives. But they would face these challenges together in the house on Maple Street that had become a sanctuary for broken people learning to be whole again. They had moved beyond simply surviving to actively choosing their future, supporting each other through each difficult step. The basement where Harold Brennan had tried to erase their humanity had been sealed by the police, marked as evidence in an ongoing investigation. But above ground, in the light-filled rooms of the old Victorian house, three women were reclaiming their names, their voices, and their right to determine their own destiny. Marcus sat on the front porch later that night, long after the last reporter had packed up and driven away. The street was quiet again, restored to its normal evening rhythm. But everything had changed irrevocably. They were no longer anonymous refugees starting over in a small town. They were public figures, their story now part of the national conversation about survival and resilience. Inside the house, he could hear the quiet murmur of conversation as the three women talked about their families' impending visits, processing excitement and anxiety in equal measure. Emma's laughter drifted from the living room where she was, showing Rebecca how to braid Chester's matted fur. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new reporters, new complications. The families who had grieved for 2 years would arrive to find daughters who had been changed by experiences they couldn't fully understand. The legal system would continue its methodical process of documenting crimes and seeking justice. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were together. And that, Marcus thought as he looked up at the stars that Megan had waited 2 years to see again, was enough foundation to build a future on. 6 months had passed since that chaotic day when reporters lined Maple Street like soldiers in an unwanted army. The house that had once echoed with the tentative steps of 3 women learning to live again now buzzed with the comfortable chaos of an expanded family. The kitchen table that had hosted awkward first breakfasts now accommodated 9 people on Sunday mornings, when the extended families gathered for what had become a cherished tradition. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching Emma teach Megan's younger cousin how to properly throw a baseball in the backyard. The 8-year-old boy had arrived 3 days ago with Megan's parents for their monthly visit, and Emma had immediately appointed herself as his mentor in all things related to their new home. "She's going to be a wonderful big sister," Jessica said, appearing beside him with a steaming mug of coffee. Her voice carried a warmth that had taken months to fully return, but was now as natural as breathing. Marcus smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. "She's been practicing on all of you." It was true. Emma had somehow assumed the role of family coordinator, ensuring everyone felt included and cared for. She reminded Rebecca to take her art supplies when she visited her father in Colorado. She insisted on video calls with Jessica's sister Amy every Tuesday evening. She had appointed herself as the official greeter for all family visits, complete with handmade welcome signs and carefully planned activities. The transformation of the house itself reflected the expansion of their family unit. The front parlor had been converted into an art studio where Rebecca painted the large canvases that were beginning to attract attention from local galleries. The library had become Jessica's study space, where she worked toward completing her teaching degree. Through online courses, Megan had claimed the sunroom as her writing sanctuary, where she crafted the memoir that would eventually help other survivors understand they weren't alone. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Jessica asked, settling into the window seat that had become her preferred spot for morning conversations. Marcus considered the question. Tonight marked the opening of Rebecca's first solo art exhibition at the downtown gallery. The paintings she'd created over the past 6 months told the story of emergence from darkness into light, of finding beauty after trauma, of building new families from the fragments of broken lives. The local art community had embraced her work with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, especially Rebecca herself. "Not nervous," Marcus said finally. "Proud, excited, maybe a little overwhelmed by how far we've all come." Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Rebecca working on last-minute preparations for the exhibition. She'd chosen to wear a dress. She'd designed and sewn herself, a flowing creation in shades of blue that reminded Marcus of the sky on the morning they'd first emerged from their ordeal. Her confidence had grown steadily as her art gained recognition, but tonight would be her biggest public appearance since the initial media frenzy. Megan appeared in the kitchen, her laptop under one arm and a determined expression on her face. "I just got off a call with the publisher," she announced. "They want to move up the release date for the book. Apparently, there's more interest than they anticipated." "That's wonderful," Jessica said, though Marcus could hear the underlying concern in her voice. Megan's memoir had been a labor of love and healing, but its impending publication would inevitably bring renewed media attention to their story. "It's what we expected," Megan said, reading Jessica's expression accurately. "But this time, we're ready for it. We control the narrative now." The kitchen gradually filled with the familiar sounds of their morning routine. Emma burst through the back door with grass stains on her jeans and dirt under her fingernails, chattering excitedly about the baseball lesson she'd just concluded. Rebecca joined them for her customary pre-exhibition breakfast of toast and anxiety. Marcus started a second pot of coffee, knowing they'd need the caffeine to fuel the day's emotional intensity. The doorbell chimed, and Emma immediately raced to answer it. Her delighted squeal announced the arrival of Dr. Kim, who had become not just their therapist, but a genuine friend to the family. She appeared in the kitchen carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and wearing the warm smile that had helped guide them through their darkest moments. "For the artist," Dr. Kim said, presenting the flowers to Rebecca with a flourish. "These are for courage, loyalty, and new beginnings, all things you've mastered beautifully." Rebecca accepted the bouquet with tears in her eyes. "You've been with us through everything. I can't imagine doing this without you." "You won't have to find out," Dr. Kim assured her. I'll be in the front row tonight, cheering louder than anyone." As the morning progressed, the house filled with visitors who had become integral parts of their extended family. Detective Morrison stopped by with updates on the ongoing investigation that had expanded to encompass Harold Brennan's activities across multiple states. The evidence they'd provided had helped identify 7 additional victims and brought closure to families who had waited years for answers. Dorothy Chen from next door arrived with her traditional contribution to any family gathering, a casserole that could feed a small army and enough gossip to entertain them through dinner. She'd become the unofficial neighborhood ambassador to their unusual household, fielding questions from curious locals and protecting their privacy when necessary. "The Hendersons want to know if you're planning any more additions to the family," Dorothy said with a mischievous grin. "Apparently, they're taking bets on whether you'll adopt any more strays." Marcus laughed, realizing that to the outside world, their family probably did look like a collection of strays who had found each other. But he'd learned that the strongest families weren't always the ones connected by blood. Sometimes they were the ones connected by choice, by shared experience, by the decision to love unconditionally despite past wounds. The afternoon brought a different kind of visitor, a young woman named Sarah Martinez, who had read about their story and reached out through victim services. She'd escaped from a trafficking situation 3 months ago and was struggling to rebuild her life. Dr. Kim had suggested that meeting other survivors might help her healing process. Jessica took the lead in welcoming Sarah, drawing on the leadership, skills she'd developed as the spokesperson for their group. She showed Sarah around the house, explained how they'd structured their daily routines to support each other's healing, and offered practical advice about navigating family relationships after trauma. "The hardest part," Jessica explained as they sat in the garden that Megan had planted behind the house, "is learning to trust your own instincts again. We'd been told for so long that our thoughts and feelings were wrong that we forgot how to listen to ourselves." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with tears and hope in equal measure. "Everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful to be free, and I am. But I also feel angry and confused and scared, and people don't want to hear about those parts. Those feelings are just as valid as gratitude," Rebecca said, joining their conversation after finishing her exhibition preparations. "Healing isn't linear, and it's not pretty, but it's real, and it's yours." Marcus watched from the kitchen window as the 3 women continued their conversation in the garden. Sarah was the 4th survivor they'd mentored over the past 6 months, each one referred through the network of support services that had grown up around their story. He'd never expected their home to become an informal sanctuary for other survivors, but it had happened naturally as word spread through the community of people who understood trauma from the inside. Emma had adapted to the constant flow of visitors with the resilience that continued to amaze Marcus. She'd learned to recognize the signs of adult sadness and had developed her own strategies for providing comfort. Her collection of stuffed animals had expanded to include comfort items for any guests who might need them. She'd mastered the art of knowing when to offer distraction and when to simply sit quietly beside someone who was processing difficult emotions. As evening approached, the family began preparing for Rebecca's exhibition opening. The excitement was palpable, but Marcus could sense the underlying nervousness that came with any public appearance. Despite their growing confidence, the 3 women still struggled with being in crowded spaces, with having their picture taken, with the attention that their story continued to generate. "Remember," Dr. Kim said, as they gathered in the living room for a final pep talk, "tonight is about celebrating Rebecca's art and her courage in sharing her story through her work. You don't owe anyone explanations or details beyond what you choose to share." Jessica straightened Rebecca's dress and adjusted the silver necklace that had been a gift from her sister Amy. "You're not just an artist tonight," she said. "You're proof that creativity can survive anything, that beauty can grow from the worst circumstances." Megan handed Rebecca a small wrapped package. Inside was a bracelet she'd made from beads that represented each member of their chosen family. Deep blue for the peace they'd found together, silver for the strength they'd discovered in themselves, and gold for the hope that sustained them through the darkest times. "So you'll remember that you're not alone out there," Megan said simply. The gallery was packed when they arrived, filled with a diverse crowd that included art collectors, local dignitaries, fellow survivors from their support network, and family members who had traveled from across the country to witness this milestone. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched Rebecca move through the crowd, discussing her work with confidence and grace. The paintings themselves were breathtaking. Each canvas told part of the story of their journey from captivity to freedom, but abstracted in ways that honored their experience without exploiting it. The centerpiece was a massive work titled Emergence, which depicted three figures supporting each other as they climbed from darkness toward light. But it was the smaller paintings that moved Marcus most deeply, intimate portraits of quiet, moments that had defined their healing process. "She's captured something I didn't even realize she was seeing," Jessica murmured as they stood before a painting that showed a kitchen table set for 5, with morning light streaming through windows that had once seemed like barriers, but now invited the world inside. Emma had appointed herself as Rebecca's assistant for the evening, carrying business cards and greeting visitors with the poise of someone far older than her 7 years. She'd memorized details about each painting and offered explanations to anyone who would listen, her innocent enthusiasm adding an unexpected layer of authenticity to the event. "This one is about how families can be made from people who choose each other," Emma told a bemused art critic, pointing to a canvas that depicted 5 figures of different sizes sharing a meal. "And this one shows how sometimes the dark places make you appreciate the light more." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself in conversation with other attendees who had been touched by their story in various ways. A social worker who had restructured her approach to working with trauma survivors. A teacher who had incorporated lessons about resilience into her curriculum. A teenage girl who had found the courage to report her own abuse after reading about their survival. "You've changed more lives than you realize," said Dr. Patricia Sanchez, the trauma specialist who had conducted their initial medical examinations. "The way you've chosen to heal publicly, to show that survivors can thrive, it's given hope to people who thought recovery was impossible." Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin and Rebecca stood surrounded by red dots marking sold paintings, a familiar figure approached their group. It was Linda Chen, the reporter who had been first to arrive on Maple Street during the initial media frenzy. But tonight, she came not as a journalist, but as someone whose life had been changed by their story. "I wanted to thank you," she said to Jessica, her professional composure softened by genuine emotion. "Covering your story changed how I approach victim interviews, how I think about trauma reporting. You taught me that survival stories aren't about the rescue, they're about what happens after." Jessica smiled, remembering her own words from that first press conference. "We saved each other." It had taken months for her to fully understand the truth of that statement, to recognize that their strength had come not from being rescued, but from choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep building something beautiful from the ruins of what had been stolen from them. The drive home was quiet, filled with the satisfied exhaustion that comes after achieving something significant. Rebecca sat in the front seat, clutching a folder full of business cards from people interested in commissioning work or featuring her art in other exhibitions. In the back, Emma had fallen asleep against Megan's shoulder while Jessica texted updates to family members who couldn't attend. "I keep thinking about what that woman said," Rebecca murmured as they turned onto Maple Street. "About us changing lives. I never thought about it that way." "We didn't set out to be inspirational," Jessica said. "We just set out to survive. But maybe that's enough. Maybe showing other people that survival is possible is the most important thing we can do." Back at the house, they settled into their familiar evening routine with the addition of processing the night's emotions. Emma insisted on staying up long enough to help Rebecca hang the newspaper clipping announcing her exhibition in the scrapbook. They'd started to document their new life together. "Are you happy?" Emma asked Rebecca as they carefully positioned the article on the page. Rebecca considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Not happy like before everything happened. That person is gone. But happy in a different way. Happy because I know I can survive anything now. Happy because I have people who love me no matter what. Happy because I get to make beautiful things and share them with the world." Marcus tucked Emma into bed with the assistance of her stuffed animal committee, each creature carefully positioned to ensure maximum comfort and protection. As he kissed her goodnight, she wrapped her small arms around his neck with the fierce affection that never failed to remind him how much they'd all healed together. "Daddy," she whispered, "are Jessica and Rebecca and Megan going to live with us forever?" It was a question she'd asked before, usually during times of transition or change when her security felt threatened. Marcus gave her the same answer he always did, the one that had proven true over and over again. "As long as they want to be here, and as long as we want them here, they're part of our family," he said. "Some families are made by birth, and some families are made by choice. Ours is made by choice, which makes it extra strong." Downstairs, he found the three women gathered in the living room with tea and the quiet satisfaction that came after, successfully navigating a public challenge. They'd moved beyond simply surviving each day to actively building the lives they wanted. Jessica was enrolled in graduate school and would begin student teaching in the fall. Rebecca's art was gaining recognition beyond their small town, with interest from galleries in major cities. Megan's book had already helped other survivors find their voices, and she was developing a non-profit organization to provide resources for long-term captivity survivors. "Thank you," Jessica said as Marcus joined them, "for everything, for finding us, for keeping us safe, for letting us become part of your family." "Thank you for letting me become part of yours," Marcus replied, settling into the chair that had become his designated spot during these evening conversations. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each processing the events of the day and the journey that had brought them to this point. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its normal nighttime quiet, but inside the house on Maple Street, four people who had found each other in the aftermath of trauma continued the work of building something lasting and beautiful. "I've been thinking about getting a dog," Megan said suddenly, breaking the peaceful silence. The suggestion surprised everyone, but as they discussed the logistics and possibilities, Marcus realized it was another sign of how far they'd all come. The women who had once been afraid to leave the house were now confident enough to take responsibility for another vulnerable creature. They were thinking about the future in concrete terms, making plans that extended beyond simple survival. "Emma would love a dog," Rebecca said. "She's been asking about pets since we moved in." We'd need to fence the backyard," Jessica added practically, "and research which breeds work best with children." As they planned and dreamed together, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing transformation. The house that had once held terrible secrets had become a place of healing and hope. The basement that had imprisoned three young women was now sealed forever, but above ground, In the light-filled rooms they'd claimed as their own, new stories were being written. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, marking the end of another day in their ongoing journey. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Interviews for Jessica's teaching internship, a commission meeting for Rebecca's next exhibition, editing sessions for Megan's second book. But they would face these challenges together, supported by the unshakable foundation they'd built from shared experience and chosen love. As they prepared to head upstairs for the night, Marcus took one last look around the living room that had become the heart of their unconventional family. The walls displayed Rebecca's paintings alongside Emma's artwork and family photos that included biological relatives and chosen family members alike. Megan's books were scattered on the coffee table next to Jessica's teaching materials and Emma's homework. It was a space that reflected all of their interests and personalities, a physical manifestation of the life they'd built together. The house on Maple Street had witnessed terrible things, but it had also been the birthplace of something miraculous. The transformation of 4 broken people into a family bound not by blood or legal obligation, but by the conscious choice to love and support each other through whatever came next. They had proven that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, that families could be created from the most unlikely circumstances. Standing at the foot of the stairs, listening to the gentle sounds of 3 women and 1 little girl, settling in for the night in the rooms above, Marcus understood that they had all been rescued in the most profound way possible. Not by outside intervention or dramatic gestures, but by the simple act of choosing to open their hearts to each other, to believe in the possibility of better days, and to never stop fighting for the life they deserved to live. The nightmare that had brought them together was over, but the love story they'd created was just beginning. And in the quiet house on Maple Street, surrounded by the family he'd never expected, but couldn't imagine living without, Marcus Williams fell asleep knowing that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the spaces where the worst things used to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.